Tom has joined us.
Okay. All right. Good afternoon. Are we ready? Are we okay?
Yes, we're good to convene.
Oh, okay.
Hello.
Okay. Okay. Good afternoon. I'm Karen Farmer-White, Chair of the State Board of Education, and I'd like to call us to order as the Committee of the Whole. I'd like to start by welcoming Ava Rankin, who's joining us for her first meeting as our new junior high school member. Ava is a rising junior in the Upper St. Clair School District. For the next 2 years, she will serve as an advisory member of the board assigned to the Council of Basic Education. So Ava, we look forward to working with you. I anticipated introducing another new student member to join our Council of Higher Education. However, due to the disruptions caused by COVID-19, a student has not been nominated yet to represent the community college sector. We will continue to work with the commission that represents community colleges to identify a student for our fall meeting. Before we turn to our business this afternoon, I'd like to address the logistics of how we will conduct this virtual meeting. All state board members have permissions that allow you to ask questions and deliberate about our discussion items as they are being presented. Members of the public are muted during time for presentation and discussion. When we arrive at each opportunity for public comment, I will ask members of the public who are participating via webinar to indicate if they wish to speak by selecting the raise your hand icon located on the toolbar on the bottom of your screen. Staff will then unmute you one at a time to make comments that will be limited to 3 minutes per speaker. Member of the public who are participating only via teleconference will be unmuted and have an opportunity to provide comment after those participating via webinar. I also want to announce that this meeting will be recorded via the webinar platform. Before I proceed, are there any questions from board members about the meeting format before we move ahead with our business? Okay.
Hello.
At this time, I'd like our administrative assistant to call the roll for attendance. Stephanie?
Mr. Agris? Jim, Mr. Agris?
Jim Agris here, present.
Honorable Achel?
Here.
Dr. Barker?
Present.
Mr. Barrett?
Here.
Mr. Barrett?
I'm here.
Dr. Bracy Green? Dr. Carnicella?
Here.
Senator Ginneman? I'm sorry. Senator Ginneman, I didn't hear.
I'm here.
Thank you. Ms. Dungy Glenn? Here. Ms. Griffin?
Here.
Dr. Gunter Smith?
Here.
Dr. Keeling? Honorable Ali Green?
Here.
Senator Langerholt?
Here.
Dr. Perry?
Here.
Ms. Rankin?
Here.
Representative Roebuck?
Here.
Representative Sonny?
Here.
Ms. Swigard? Ms. Farmer-White?
Here.
Dr. Williams?
Here.
Thank you.
Okay. At this time, I'd like to recognize Dr. Perry for the Council of Higher Education.
Thank you. If we can just ask all of our presenters to make sure that their lines are muted. Otherwise, we wind up getting feedback. We'd appreciate it. Thank you. So welcome, Eva. And I'm the chair of the Council of Higher Education, John Perry. I'd like to call the council to order. As this is the first council meetings since we've been convening virtually. Our first item of business is to catch up on approval of past meeting minutes. So first, let's call up the minutes from our November 13, 2019 meeting. Are there any corrections or additions to the minutes? Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? The ayes have it. Thank you. Next, let's call up the minutes from our January 8th, 2020 meeting. Are there any corrections or addition to these minutes? Is there a motion to approve?
Agris, so moved.
Thank you, Jim. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Sandra. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it. Thank you. I'd like to now recognize Deputy Secretary of Post-Secondary and Higher Education, Noe Ortega, who will present the department's annual Human Capital Report on the status of educator certification. Before I turn it over to Deputy Secretary Ortega, I just want to commend his and the department's work. There's been a lot that's been happening in the background that we won't have much of a chance to discuss today. That has been the guidance coming from the Secretary and both of our Deputy Secretaries helping with that guidance with associations and presidents and principals across the state. They have been indispensable in their work for us, and we are grateful to them collectively and the department and everyone who has been a part of this effort. Thank you, both of you and all of you so very much. Deputy Secretary Ortega, the floor is yours.
Dr. Perry, thank you, and I want to reciprocate that to you and all those who are joining us to here today who are leading either their organizations, institutions, these unprecedented times. These are challenging times, and I think collectively we've been able to sort of navigate those in the way that we need to. Today, we will be sharing with the members of the Higher Ed Council the Human Capital Report that Dr. Deborah Heath Thornton, who's the Director of the Bureau for School Leadership and Teacher Quality, will walk us through. Dr. Perry, this is part of a two-part presentation for today, and I know that we'll transition. It may also be worthwhile when this is concluded that maybe we hold any questions that may come until the end of the second panel, if that's okay with you, Dr. Perry, and we can proceed that way so we could be efficient with everyone's time. So with that, I will pivot to Dr. Heath Thornton, and I will share my screen as she begins her presentation to highlight some of the elements included in here. Dr. Heath Thornton, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. All right, wait, the technology here is not doing what I planned for it to do. Okay, if you could start with screen number 2, please, Noe. In keeping with our guiding commitments, I'd like to share with you today a story about the state of the teacher workforce in Pennsylvania and the work we're doing to have a positive impact as the status emerges. Number 3. As the number of this is the number of certification programs offered by public and private institutions and alternative program providers. 5. As previously discussed, and by now you're well aware that over the past decade, with a couple of instances of a very minor uptick, Pennsylvania has experienced a declining number of students who choose to enroll in teacher preparation programs. Obviously, this has helped to feed our shortage problem. So, let me quickly provide you with a snapshot of teacher and subject shortage areas in Pennsylvania. 7. First, our method for measuring teacher shortage. We use emergency permits, meaning the holder is not yet properly certified. And 8, retirement based on age, which is 55 years or more, and 9. In years of service based on 30 years or more of service, 10. We also use classroom teachers, match the certification areas as a gauge for our current employment situation in Pennsylvania. As for subject shortage areas, 11. The top 7 areas are displayed. A full listing is available on the U.S. Department of Education website. To touch just very briefly on educator effectiveness, 12. I believe we've shared a similar report of this type of information in the past. But to highlight, we committed to paying close attention to how educator effectiveness disproportionately impacts students of color, 15. I want to call your attention to a couple of items. I won't walk you through each line, but I want to highlight 2 key takeaways. The majority of educators in Pennsylvania are effective according to building level data. However, for Title I schools, the largest number of teachers who were considered ineffective across all quartiles were in schools with the largest populations of students in poverty and students of color, 17. We've engaged in an array of initiatives to impact these situations. 2 key initiatives are the regulatory changes and the Aspiring to Educate program. I'll ask that you allow me to relinquish right here at this point so that we can delve a little deeper into a very promising initiative, Aspiring to Educate. Thank you.
Dr. Perry, I think at this point, if you want to transition to the panel, this is a good point, if that's okay with you.
Okay, so is this going to be yourself and Dr. Donna Marie Cole Mallet and Dr. David Monk, along with Sharif El Mekki?
That's correct.
Okay, so let me just introduce you properly and say that Dr. Donna Marie Cole Mallet and Dr. David Monk are both special assistants to the Deputy Secretary. And we also welcome Sharif El Mekki, who is the CEO of the Center for Black Educator Development. Together, they will make a brief presentation on efforts related to educator diversity that were discussed more extensively during this morning's Teacher and School Leader Effectiveness Committee meeting. Following their presentation, we will receive a report on the work of the committee, and we look forward to receiving your report as a panel now.
Thank you, Dr. Perry. At this point, we'll transition to Dr. Donna Marie Cole Mallet to kick us off.
Good afternoon, and thank you for the opportunity. I just want to say, can everyone hear me?
Yes, Donna Marie, we can hear you.
Yes,
Perfect.
we can.
Thank you for the opportunity to present to all of you today. We find this opportunity extremely significant in light of our teacher shortage, the lack of diversity within our workforce, and the impact COVID-19 has had and we anticipate will continue to have on exacerbating these existing problems. We're here because as a state that serves roughly 33% of students of color, we continue to be the least diverse state in the nation in terms of our teaching workforce, where 96% of our teachers are white. Students of color have access to teachers who have the least number of years in the profession, and our graduates of color continue to leave our state in alarming numbers. We're here to advocate for a way to address this underlying issue that will be sustainable and impactful to the field as well as to the profession. I'll start by sharing some PDE data on the state of our condition, what we have been doing to address the issues, our pilot program, which is our Aspiring to Educate program, and the adoption of culturally relevant and sustaining education. CRSE centers on equity for all students throughout the Commonwealth. We have been piloting and developing competencies around CRSE through our Aspiring to Educate program. It's important to note that CRSE is not just about Black and Brown students. The data shows that while students of color benefit from having teachers who look like them in the classroom. It's important to know that white students benefit tremendously as well. Their academic performance improves significantly when they have access to teachers of color. In the presentation today, I'll be joined by my colleague, Dr. David Monk, who has spent over 20 years of his career at Penn State as Dean of the College of Ed. And David can speak directly to the work that he has done at Penn State and the efforts made there to ensure faculty were culturally relevant and sustaining in their practice. And he could speak to the fact that as one of the top 2 institutions that produce the vast majority of teachers for the state, that he has had to send faculty all the way to California for training on culturally relevant and sustaining education, when we have the ability to do that work right here in Pennsylvania. So he'll be followed by Sharif El-Mekki, who is CEO of the Center for Black Educator Development, and just an absolute pioneer in his work and commitment to advocacy for diversity of Pennsylvania's teaching workforce. Some of the data that I wanted to share, and thank you, Noah, for sharing this, but 6 counties in Pennsylvania have reported having no teachers of color while they serve students of color. 71 has been, in 2000, a 71% decrease in the number of African-American graduates in colleges of ed across the state. And that number continues to climb each year. Noe, if you can go to the next slide. Additionally, what we see here is that Black and Hispanic teachers are leaving the field or leaving the profession at a higher rate than any other racial group, while the demographics of the state in terms of Black and Latinx and Hispanic students continue to rise. Next slide. This particular chart speaks to what I mentioned earlier, the fact that students of color have access to teachers who have the least amount of years in terms of experience in the profession. What you can see is that concentrated on the bottom right really demonstrates that white students have access to teachers who are more experienced. So our students of color have teachers who are leaving the profession in very high numbers. Next slide. So what culturally relevant and sustaining education does is that it just advocates for equity for all students. That's simply what it's about at the heart of it. It considers the elimination of systemic and institutional barriers that inhibit the success of all students. It considers it is intersectional in nature, in that it considers mental health and wellness, trauma-informed practices, technological and virtual engagement, all of these things which are even more significant and important right now with what we're facing with COVID. Next slide. Some of the competencies that are associated with culturally relevant and sustaining education includes really the reflection on your own cultural lens, understanding what microaggressions are, having high expectation for students within the classroom, including family and communities in the conversation on education, and being able to design curriculum that bring real world issues into the classroom. So those are just some of the competencies that are associated with this that have been piloted so far through our Aspiring to Educate program, where we have been working with institutions in the Southeast, but the interest in culturally relevant and sustaining education is not just limited to the Southeast, it is from the entire state. We have been getting responses from, and as you can see on the 23rd and the 24th of this month, we hosted a summit centered around the work that we have been doing with the Aspiring to Educate program in culturally relevant and sustaining education. And we had stakeholder participation, about 200 different stakeholders join us, which included PACT, the Pennsylvania Association for Colleges and Teacher Educators. We had high school students, we had parents, we had Department of Ed professionals, school board members. We had just a significant amount of buy-in from folks across the state who are asking the question, how do we do this? We need support. We have a lack of teachers of color in our district. We are unable to retain these teachers. What kinds of support can you offer? And CRSE is a response to that. So I'd like to turn it over to Dr. David Monk, who could speak specifically to the implications for institutions of higher education. Thank you so much.
And thank you, Dr. Cole-Mellott, and thanks to the members of the council for this opportunity to share my perspective on the implications for institutions of higher education. So I can't speak on behalf of all IHEs, but based on my 20 years at Penn State, I can offer some insights into the challenges and opportunities surrounding culturally relevant and sustaining education for colleges and universities around the Commonwealth. So for starters, it's clear that this is an important and emerging area for research in the field. The statistics Donna Marie shared are sobering and have attracted the attention of scholars throughout the nation. It's also clear that IHEs are training and hiring scholars with interests and expertise in understanding and dealing with social justice issues in the field. The IHEs in Pennsylvania are assembling an impressive and growing cohort of faculty members with this expertise, many of whom are people of color. IHEs have also been making extensive efforts to provide training for existing faculty members who feel the need for assistance in strengthening their understanding and awareness of culturally relevant and sustaining education. And that's what prompted us at Penn State to send a delegation to the University of Southern California to engage in an intensive course of study to supplement and strengthen their background in these areas. So it's clear that progress is being made, and this is good news. I've also been very impressed with the level of interest being expressed by IHEs throughout Pennsylvania in this work, and the Aspiring to Educate program in particular. I'm now based in Western Pennsylvania, and it's clear that the IHEs in the central as well as the western part of the Commonwealth are interested in building on the initial pilot project. At the same time, there are challenges, and I want to mention a few that warrant your attention. So first, there's the already crowded nature of the teacher preparation curriculum. IHEs are under continuing pressure to add new elements to teacher preparation. The competition for time in the curriculum is intense, and culturally relevant and sustaining education needs to be more than just another add-on. Instead, we need to think of these competencies as elements that are infused throughout the entire curriculum. Second, we need to have clarity about the meaning of culturally relevant and sustaining education and the related competencies. And here I think you can be very proud of the progress that has been made to develop the definitions, the list of competencies, and the parts of the toolkit that have been created in the Aspiring to Educate pilot project. Third, we need to develop what I'll call a sophisticated accountability system. It's important to recognize that each IHE is dealing with unique circumstances and that the competencies need to be interpreted in light of these circumstances. Major program reviews provide the opportunity for each IHE to explain the efforts being made and the progress being realized. PDE is in the position of providing clarity about the goals and feedback about the adequacy of the progress site by site. So again, thank you for this opportunity to share these thoughts. And I think now it's Sharif Al-Mekki's turn to make some additional comments. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think Mr. Al-Mekki may have dropped off for a moment. Mr. Al-Mekki, have you rejoined us?
Do we want to give him a minute, Karen?
Karen, in the interim, I can move to summarize as we wait for Sharif to join. And then if that's okay.
Sure,
and I think one of the things that's important to point out here, Dr. Perry, and to the members of the Higher Ed Council and those of you who are tuning in to this meeting, is that about 3 years ago when we began the endeavors to move towards developing recommendations to this board on Chapter 49, which is pretty much the regulations that guide certification of all educators in Pennsylvania, we committed to do this through multiple lenses. One of which is to look at shortages not just in the number of folks who are currently in or who are leaving the profession, or by areas of content expertise, such as subject areas, but also to look at it from the perspective of composition. And it's important that some of the things that we're highlighting here are outcomes from that lens that we took into this work. So paying attention to diversity in its composition was a very important aspect, especially since you consider that Pennsylvania has not only been a leader in the preparation of teachers, but someone who many have looked to as an exporter of educators into other states. And so to be able to begin to take back some of the conversations happening around new competencies that need to be infused and to propose that into the package is something that we're extremely proud of to have worked on with our stakeholders and the board as well. But we didn't stop short of just focusing on the composition. We also made sure that we didn't put the responsibility of diversity, equity, and inclusion in the hands of just teachers of color or students of color. We wanted to make sure that every student in Pennsylvania had access to someone who had been engaged either through professional development or competencies that came from an ed prep program in issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion to benefit the Commonwealth as a whole. And so this is a representation of how this work continues to be informed by research, because it's also important that we're methodical in how we reach any conclusions about what's in the best interest for the students in the field, particularly when we consider the careful nature of recommendations that put out there that shape and mold and inform young learners as they too traverse their educational pathways to begin to think about their contributions to society once they've completed their K-12 education. Sharif, if you're on the phone, I think at this point, if you're willing to provide a few remarks about what this means in terms of its application in the field, please feel free to do so.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry for being late. I was given a opening remarks at the National Network of State Teachers of the Year. And that I've shared this before, but you know, the person that mentored me and coached me to become an effective educator was one of the few Black State Teachers of the Year for Pennsylvania. Yvonne Xavier was the State Teacher of the Year for 1994, and she was part of her assignment that year was to mentor and coach career changers, alternative certification educators like myself. And what I believe what she brought to the table was something that when I would work with my colleagues who were from a variety of different backgrounds, they felt that they lacked what she would provide us as coaching and mentoring. They did not feel like they were able to have access to that prior to becoming a teacher or while they were educating youth across the state. What I believe that these proposed amendments can offer are not only for pre-service, but it can be a continuation of elevating our profession across the Commonwealth and across people's careers. I firmly believe, and we're building our organization to support not only recruitment, but the retention, because the absolutely best recruitment plan is a strong retention plan. And nobody can think about retention if they are not prepped and prepared to do the craft that they love so much. You know, it's nothing like entering a field or a profession with your heart into it, but you knowing that, you know what, I am missing some significant tools in order to be effective. And I appreciate this, you know, our state board, as well as all the constituents and stakeholders who've weighed in, who've spoken about how this can impact not only the trajectories in our profession, but ultimately the commitments we make to student outcomes across this Commonwealth. And again, it is not just for students of color, while they will definitely benefit, it is for all students and all marginalized students, that every single one of our 500 or 501 districts across our Commonwealth have within their schools, classrooms, and systems. And so thank you for engaging the Center for Black Educator Development to be a partner, as well as a learner in this process. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharif. And I should end the panel discussion by simply suggesting that the Center for Black Educator Development, which Sharif El-Mekki is the CEO of, is certainly one of the areas that really shows about the importance of partnering with community organizations to offset some of the shortfalls that maybe exist in districts, right? Often we hear from certain communities, Dr. Perry, that it's difficult to engage in a conversation about diversity and equity and inclusion when there isn't that representation present at either their LEA, school district, or institution of higher ed. To be able to reach out to proxies or partnering organizations such as the Center for Black Educator Development at least begins to nudge the conversation slightly and then open up a dialogue around what some very complex issues. And I would be remiss if I didn't point out that often what we've seen play out in society at the moment is the real pressing need to continue these conversations in the classroom to prepare us for some of the challenges that face our society on a daily basis. So with that, Dr. Perry, I'll wrap up these two presentations and turn it back to you. And happy to answer any questions that maybe exist in the council.
Thank you very much, Noe. Are there any questions from the council or other members of the State Board of Ed? Okay, well, hearing none, I will say thank you again to the panel. Oh, it sounds like there may be someone with a question, or is it just feedback?
It may be feedback, John. I was just going to know if members will need to unmute themselves if they would like to ask a question.
Yes, and if you don't have a question, then please mute yourself. Karen, I'm not sure if it's just me, but I can't hear you.
I was trying to navigate. It appears that Representative Sonny is raising his hand to ask a question. And Representative Sonny, it looks like you have unmuted yourself and the floor is yours.
Thank you. It was a great presentation. My question is, I'm just a little bit confused on when it comes, are the young teachers that are coming up, were they leaving the state and staying in the profession, or were they leaving the profession? I wasn't totally clear on which one it was, you know, and if they were just simply leaving the state because opportunities were better somewhere else, or if they were actually leaving the profession.
Representative Sonny, you raise a really important issue, and I think in most cases, folks are leaving the profession and often entering other professions and staying in the state. But there is an occasion, given the location of Pennsylvania and particularly some of our urban centers, that they may even be leaving the state to other places that possibly sometime offer even more competitive salaries for educators themselves. So that's one of the things that we've begun to sort of pay a little bit closer attention to. Needless to say, the retention is a big concern. And the better we understand it, and the better we know about the migration patterns, it would be certainly helpful. Our efforts don't stop short, Representative, and I want to add this element that as we think about solutions for the educator pipeline, there are folks who also want to leave other professions for a number of reasons that might want to move into education as well, especially as we begin to switch the narrative. So we're also making sure that we shift our attention to those individuals as well, to make sure that this is a multi-pronged, multifaceted approach to addressing the concerns around the pipeline. So I appreciate the question.
Thank you, Dr. Ortega. Any other questions for the Deputy Secretary? Okay, then thank you again for the presentation. You know, it really couldn't be more timely in our world, and I'm going to start with a thank you to Ms. Dungy Glenn, who we'll be hearing from next. And the next item on our agenda is a report from the Teacher and School Leader Effectiveness Committee, which Ms. Dungy Glenn is leading, and we look forward to receiving your report, Sandra.
Thank you, Jonathan. And I will start by first thanking Noe and Donna and David and Sharif for their presentation, and also for the work of the department, because they have been partners on this Chapter 49 work, and the work around culturally relevant and sustaining education has emerged as one of the critical competencies that's going to be added to Chapter 49, and what we're looking for as we prepare our educators And I wanted to just highlight a couple of things that they brought out in their presentations, because I think it's important to think about this work as something that needs to permeate our educator preparation and development strategies, and not just as something in a silo. The data point that only 4% of our educators are of color means that the vast majority of our students in Pennsylvania are never exposed to a teacher of color, Black or brown, Asian teacher. And that's challenging, because of course we are preparing young people for an ever increasingly diverse world and country. And so the importance of their development and exposure during their development, I think has become even more essential. And also the fact that all students benefit from having teachers of color. So academically and socially, it's something that is beneficial to all students. But one point that is of particular concern, as I think about the development of African-American students, one of the points that was brought out in the Aspiring to Educate Summit was that having just one Black teacher for an African-American student resulted in a 39% decrease in the likelihood of that student dropping out of school, 39% decrease. And so it is essential, again, and oftentimes life-changing for many of our students. So for all of those reasons, developing the competencies as well as better recruitment and retention strategies, I think is a critical part of what we're going to be doing and what we need to do in our educator, teacher, and leader development work here in the Commonwealth. And so with that as a backdrop, I want to lead into my report from our committee. So this morning, the Teacher and School Leader Effectiveness Committee approved proposed amendments to Chapter 49, our regulations that govern certification of professional personnel. The proposed amendments will be called up for action by the Council of Higher Education, and if approved, considered by the State Board. I plan to briefly review key amendments to the chapter, but first let me remind you of the extensive work that's been conducted to date. My committee has had a long-standing focus on issues surrounding educator quality, educator preparedness, and educator diversity. We entered into discussion about ways the board can directly impact these issues when we received recommended amendments to Chapter 49 prepared by Secretary Rivera, and agreed to consider those recommendations as a starting point for the major review of Chapter 49 that the State Board conducts at 10-year intervals. The committee held public hearings across the state to collect stakeholder input on the Secretary's recommendations, and received additional input in writing from higher education faculty, teachers, school administrators, school directors, parents, and more. We considered that feedback and made additional amendments to the proposed based on input from affected parties. A copy of those draft proposed amendments are posted to the State Board's website for members of the public who would like to follow along with our discussion. For context, the majority of amendments you'll see in the chapter reflect aligning the regulation to statutory changes, clarifying ambiguous language, and updating language for relevancy. These changes were carried forward from the Secretary's recommendations, and I will not review them all in detail as they're mostly technical in nature, and in the case of alignment to statute, not areas where the board has discretion to make refinements. Examples of such amendments include universally updating the term vocational to career and technical, and aligning special education certificates with changes enacted by the General Assembly in Act 82 of 2018. Rather, I'm going to focus my review on areas where the committee made amendments to the Secretary's proposal based on stakeholder input. Overall, amendments to the chapter seek to ensure that Pennsylvania educators are prepared and provided a foundation in a number of new competencies. The Secretary's recommendation called for pre-service preparation programs to deliver instruction in non-cognitive skills, which was defined to include professionalism, mental wellness, trauma-informed instruction, and culturally relevant instruction. We heard near universal support for from stakeholders for adding these competencies as required elements of pre-service education. We received further feedback suggesting that this recommendation could be strengthened by extending training in these competencies to current educators and by replacing the umbrella term non-cognitive skills with a term that more accurately expresses what was described in the definition. In response, the committee replaced the term non-cognitive skills with a new definition for culturally relevant and sustaining education that you will find in section 49.1 of the proposed amendments. That newly defined term identifies skills for educators that must be addressed as part of pre-service instruction, including mental wellness, trauma-informed instruction, and cultural awareness as originally proposed by Secretary Rivera. The definition also was updated to reference technological and virtual engagement and any factors that inhibit equitable access for all of Pennsylvania's students. The proposed also retains pre-service instruction in professionalism as recommended by Secretary Rivera. However, the committee addressed this by creating a new standalone definition for professional ethics and adding language that requires instruction in professional ethics to be integrated throughout educator preparation programs. The definition reflected in section 49.1 of the chapter was suggested by the Professional Standards and Practices Commission, the body that oversees educator misconduct and educator discipline in the Commonwealth. We also heard a need from the field to ensure that focus on these competencies is not limited to individuals preparing to enter the teaching profession. In particular, we heard strongly from teachers about the need for training in addressing students' mental health issues, an area included in the new definition of culturally relevant and sustaining education. In response, we proposed additional amendments to Chapter 49 that will require training in culturally relevant and sustaining education and in professional ethics for current classroom educators. This would be accomplished by adding the competencies to the Department of Education's induction plan guidelines and by directing school entities to update their professional education plans to address how professional development activities will improve employees' knowledge in these areas. We heard further concerns from stakeholders about ensuring that reading instruction is grounded in the most current research on the science of reading to meet the developmental needs of all students, including those students with dyslexia. In response to those concerns, the committee included a new definition for structured literacy that you also can find in section 49.1 of the chapter. That definition was informed by the knowledge and practice standards for teachers of reading developed by the International Dyslexia Association. The committee is proposing to add instruction and training in structured literacy to educator preparation programs and as part of ongoing professional education for current educators at the elementary level. To help support the delivery of training in these new competencies, the committee is further proposing to expand induction programs for new educators to 2 years. Initially, Secretary Rivera proposed requiring teacher preparation programs to provide 2 years of support for new educators. We heard numerous concerns from both institutions of higher education and from school entities about the logistics of expanding faculty responsibilities in that manner. Understanding those concerns, the committee continued to see a need to provide extended support for new educators, which we know is critical to improving retention in the profession. As an alternative, we've proposed that existing induction program requirements be expanded to 2 years. Induction programs would be designed by each school entity to meet its needs, and school entities can define how teacher preparation program providers may best serve and supportive partners in meeting those needs. The committee also adopted 2 recommendations from the Pennsylvania Association of School Psychologists. The first would permit school psychologists who hold certification from the National Association of School Psychologists to be granted the highest level certificate available for certification as a school psychologist. This parallels an existing policy for classroom teachers who are certified by the National Board for Professional Teaching Standards. The second permits individuals who have completed 5 years of satisfactory certified experience as a school psychologist to be issued a special education supervisory certification. In considering this request, we reviewed the preparatory coursework required to both credentials and consulted with the Bureau of Special Education. No concerns were identified, and the change may increase the availability of special education supervisors in the Commonwealth. Throughout the course of our hearings, we heard about a number of other issues that can be addressed through avenues outside of state board regulation. We reviewed those at our committee meeting as well, and I recommended courses of action that the department should take to consider those issues. I recommended that the department conduct a review of Chapter 354, its regulations governing preparation of professional educators, to ensure alignment with our amendments to Chapter 49 and to address stakeholder feedback on the length of student teaching experience as a specific requirement for the length of student teaching as specific requirement for the length of student teaching is set forth in Chapter 354. In response to stakeholder concerns, I further recommended that the department initiate an update of its student teaching evaluation and that the department continue its efforts to identify alternative methods of assessing basic skills required for certification through the authority this board already has delegated to the secretary related to assessment for certification. Before I open the floor for discussion, I want to make sure we all understand next steps related to this proposal. If approved by the council and later by the state board, the proposed amendments to Chapter 49 will be published for public comment. The proposed amendments also will be submitted to the House and Senate Committees on Education and the Independent Regulatory Review Commission. We will consider all additional input from interested stakeholders, the General Assembly, and IRRC before presenting final amendments to Chapter 49 to the board for approval. At this time, I welcome questions and comments from board members on the proposed amendments to Chapter 49. And Jonathan, thank you for this time.
Thank you very much, Sandra. Sandra, I would like to just ask if you could share a little bit of, not too much, but a little bit of detail on what the two-year induction alternative, what that really means in practice.
I'm going to defer, if you won't mind, Jonathan, to Noe to talk about that in terms of what flexibility it may provide the districts in conducting or implementing that.
Thank you. And I will have a comment unrelated as well to share, and then we can jump into any other questions from the council and board members.
Jonathan, do you mind repeating your question one more time? I
was just curious if you could share a little bit more about what it means for students to go into a two-year induction program as an alternative to what was initially proposed.
Sure. And I've got my colleague Matt Stemmes here. You're welcome to chime in, Matt, if you want to provide any additional context. So many of the challenges that people has faced with regards to induction, Jonathan, is to make sure that folks are adequately prepared before they enter the classroom, right? And to provide an opportunity to even have an extension where follow-up might be needed. We're introducing new approaches in this particular space that are tied to culturally responsive and sustainability education. But embedded in there, I think as they were reading out the definition, were a number of elements that really speak to the need for broader information. So in addition to understanding the cultural contextual pieces, there's also pieces around trauma, which are explicitly important. And then there are elements that have also emerged and have their own place in our competencies, but are part of inductions around ethics. Professional ethics has been a real challenge in a number of areas. And this allows more space for things not to be what I think, for a lack of a better term, drive-by approaches to various modules of learning, but really sustained integrated development that will really inform the educator moving forward. So this is sort of the thinking that went behind that.
Thank you. So as it concerns post-secondary education and the educating of educators, what does that mean in terms of the timeline before an educator is able to graduate and or become certified?
Sure, that doesn't change. Still, the expectation is that it be done in 4 years. And for most folks, they have to complete a lot of the prerequisites within the last 2 years when they're formally admitted to a school of education where school of education exists. So that will remain unchanged, right? And so, so that's the nice thing, is that it now allows for the continued development and ongoing to now continue it once the teacher candidate, or at that point the certified teacher, moves into the classroom.
Great, and I do sit on the PSPC board as ex officio by virtue of this role that I'm in with the State Board of Ed. And this question about the ethics issue has come up, and it's really wonderful to see that it's being addressed in this way. Thank you for doing that. One other comment in the spirit of Dr. Michelini, who would say, this is all fantastic, and I would agree with him, as you can tell. And he would say, there's one other thing, and that is the state funding system for education in Pennsylvania remains an issue. And in the absence, well, first of all, we need to think about that in the context of the disparity of teacher salaries across the state, and then what that means in relation to ensuring that there's equity across the board. So thanks for allowing me that moment to make some questions and comments. Do we have any others from the council or others on the board?
I would just like to ask a quick clarifying question. I apologize, my video is not working today. With regard to the 2-year induction, am I understanding correctly that is done at the pre-service phase, or is that being presented as an year on existing new teacher induction plans at the school district level?
Correct, Jeff. That is the existing induction plans at the school district level.
So it would be an additional year added to that?
Correct, yes. And we do know that in the Commonwealth, there currently are 58 LEAs that already are offering 2-year induction plans, and another 68 LEAs that are currently offering 3-year induction plans. So we do have some models from districts around the Commonwealth that we can start to look to see how some of those extended induction experiences have successfully been structured.
Okay, thank you.
And Jeff, yeah, really good, great question. I would just add to that one of the other underlying guiding principles behind bringing this forward is that with the increasing complexities in the field of teaching, particularly in recent years, that the 2 years is going to allow for more robust and deeper and more meaningful experiences for teachers than 1 year would allow.
And just to put a final point on it, I want to bring up a word that Dr. Lee Williams brought up in our committee meeting around this. And some of this is related to changing or impacting the mindset. And so I think part of this, the intention around the 2-year induction, is also helping LEAs think about the need for whether you call induction or onboarding teachers, having to be an extensive period of time, that it needs to be very intentional supports for new teachers that goes well beyond what we may have been doing in the past, and that too is a part of the strategy for better retention of educators in the profession. And so helping to impact both the programming but also the mindset around what adequate induction looks like.
This is Maureen Lally Green, Dr. Perry. For Dr. Dungy, Glenn, and whomever else happens to be able to answer this, I would appreciate, first of all, excellent presentation and a thorough job, Chair, and to the members of your committee. I have a question about the trauma focus and how these standards will integrate a focus on the trauma that many of our students face in our schools, whether it's family-related trauma or environment-related trauma. And maybe somebody could just address that, how you're going to be addressing that in this increased certification requirement standard.
Well, let me take a first step. But first of all, thank you for those kind words. Let me take a stab at it as the non-educator, if you will, but someone who has had experience in the field as a leader of a school, who found that there was an essential need to integrate mental and behavioral health into what was happening in the school on a day-to-day basis. And so my read of this is that this will bring mental health, behavioral health, the disciplines of social work much closer to what has been traditionally thought of the pedagogy, if you would, or the discipline surrounding educator preparation, that they will have to be a much stronger part of that. And as we talked about earlier, not as a set aside, but thinking about how to embed that throughout the course of teacher preparation or educator preparation programs. But I would foresee that we would need those disciplines to be much more closely aligned, and really those kind of interdepartmental opportunities increasing, so that as teachers are coming out, that is just a much more standard part of their formal training.
Right, thank you. And I think it's a terrific recognition of certainly major needs. That, and I love the integration of the ethics throughout everything, because that just gives such a quality to what is being done when one has a base for making decisions. So thank you. And good luck. And Matt.
Thank you.
Matt, you have some work ahead of you in your department, but I think it's great opportunities, just beautiful opportunities to serve our youth and to serve our teachers.
Thank you. We do, and thank you for the kind words and the encouragement. But the work around adverse childhood experiences is something that we've had individuals that have focused on, and so we're excited to have the opportunity and the support of the board to elevate and prioritize that work.
Thank you, Maureen and Matt. Any other comments from the council or board members?
This is Jim Barker. I just want to say that's wonderful work. Congratulate the chair, Sandra, and all the members. It's a much needed integration of not only conceptual but practical realities that are affecting the children of the Commonwealth in Pennsylvania. I applaud you for your efforts. Thank you.
And thank you, Jim.
Thank you, Jim. Okay, well, thank you again, Sandra, and thanks to the committee. The next item on our agenda, yes?
Jonathan, I might, just before we move forward, I just wanted to note for the record that Dr. Keeling was not with us when we conducted roll call, but he has joined the meeting. And I just want to make sure that Dr. Keeling is recorded in attendance.
Thank you very much, Karen.
I have him recorded. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie. The next item on our agenda is public comment. If there are any members of the public participating via webinar that would like to address the Council of Higher Education, please indicate by selecting the raise your hand icon on the toolbar at the bottom of your screen. Staff will unmute you one at a time, and your comments are limited to 3 minutes per person.
I have unmuted Marie Conti.
Go ahead, Marie.
Hello, I'm Marie Conti, representing the Pennsylvania Montessori Alliance, an organization created to advocate for Montessori education in the Commonwealth. Thank you for the work of the Teacher and School Leader Effectiveness Committee and your diligence in reviewing the Chapter 49 amendments proposed by the Secretary. And thank you for the public hearing opportunities that were provided last year. We believe the proposed revisions will benefit students and teachers. However, as many Montessori educators have shared in previous public comment and our organization representatives discussed in several meetings with PDE representatives, as well as in a meeting with Secretary Rivera last September, we are disappointed that Chapter 49 revisions do not account for a pathway for accredited Montessori teacher education programs to serve as alternative program providers that could strengthen the certified teacher pool and enable growth in public and private Montessori schools in Pennsylvania. 10 other states currently have pathways for this and have strong programs. The Montessori Teacher Education Accrediting Body, MACT, is recognized by the United States Department of Education, and we are confident that our Montessori teacher education programs meet all of the PA teacher competencies. Pennsylvania Montessori Alliance has submitted supporting documentation to PDE as well as to the Secretary's office demonstrating the alignment of Montessori teacher competencies, Montessori pedagogy, curriculum, and methodology with Pennsylvania learning standards. Additionally, Montessori education addresses the PDE goals of closing the achievement gap, supporting diversity and inclusion, high teacher retention, and strengthening the educator pipeline. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. I will note that it is the policy of the board that we don't respond to public comment. We accept them and acknowledge the information that we receive, and we keep it limited as such. That said, eventually this will be a topic that I will want to hear more about. Okay, are there any other folks from the public who would like to make a comment?
There is no one on the webinar, however, people on the phone.
Yes.
Now I will allow them.
Okay, so then we will move away from the webinar public comment and to the telephone public comment. So if there are any members of the public participating via teleconference only that would like to address the Council of Higher Ed, we will unmute the line at this time and ask for the names of each person who wishes to speak. Staff will record a list of those who wish to speak, and then we'll call on you individually to provide comment. Again, your comments are limited to 3 minutes per person. We're hearing some feedback. So for those members of the panel who have not muted themselves, please mute yourself so that Karen and Stephanie can effectively take a role of the individuals from the public participating by phone.
Thank you, John. If there is anyone participating by phone who would like to address the committee, would you please state your name at this time?
Okay.
Hey, John, I'm not hearing any interest.
Thank you, Karen. So let's go back to muting the phone lines. So we will now turn to our action item. Let's call up the proposed amendments to Chapter 49 that were presented by Ms. Dungy-Glenn. And let's recognize Ms. Dungy-Glenn for a motion.
Thank you. I move that the Council of Higher Education approve the proposed amendments to Chapter 49 as recommended by the Teacher and School Leader Effectiveness Committee, and that the proposed amendments be transmitted to the State Board of Education for its consideration.
Okay, thank you for the motion. Is there a second?
So moved.
Thank you. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? There's no opposition. The ayes have it. Thank you very much. Are there any announcements for the Council of Higher Ed before the council adjourns? Okay, hearing none, we'll now entertain a motion to adjourn the council's meeting.
So moved.
Thank you, Sandra. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Pamela. Any discussion? All in favor? Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Thank you very much. The council is adjourned. We'll turn it back over to you, Madam Chair. Is Karen still on the line?
I am prompting her now, John.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hello? Okay.
Okay, Karen.
Hi, Karen.
You know what? I just want to let Karen and Stephanie know I get disconnected like every 5 minutes. I disconnect. So just to alert you to that. So anyway, okay. So we'll move directly to the next section of our agenda. I'd like to call to 57th meeting of the State Board of Education. Our first item of business is approval of the minutes from our May 6th, 2020 meeting. Are there any corrections or additions to the minutes?
I'll move to accept them.
Agris, second.
Is there a
Second.
all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, at this time, I'd like to recognize Madam Deputy Secretary and Second Noe Ortega, Deputy Secretary for Post-Secondary and Higher Education, on the school reopening guide by the Department of Education. Mr. Stem, I'll turn control over to you.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. First, our warm regards and well wishes to everyone on the board, all of our members, as well as others in attendance today. It's good to see everyone, even virtually, as it is. As Noe and I are prepared to share some updates regarding school reopening, just to set some context, as most are aware, I've had the honor and the privilege to serve as Deputy Secretary for over the past 5 years. And then prior to that, over 22 years in the field as a teacher, a building principal, and a central office administrator. And I can tell you that in my 27 years plus, and for others on our team with more years, the times and situations we're living through today are truly unprecedented. And we know that our school leaders and our local governing bodies have the significant challenge of essentially trying to lead in a scenario in which we don't have a historical model to follow. And so it has been and will continue to be our responsibility at PDE to set the conditions that are going to assist our local school districts in determining how to balance the competing interests of providing quality education for our students while simultaneously mitigating the spread of COVID-19 in their communities. It's an incredibly challenging task, and know that we're doing everything we can to provide the conditions to assist local districts and their governing bodies in that regard. As always, the health and safety and well-being of our students is our highest priority and will continue to be. And before I screen share the presentation here in a moment, I also want to share just heartfelt thoughts from our team to anyone here with us today who has been impacted by this pandemic. We know there are some that are with us that have had some personal connections in that regard, and our heartfelt thoughts are with everyone. So with that said, let me share my presentation, our presentation, and we'll go ahead and get started. So in the interest of time, we're going to keep our remarks and our updates at a high level. We know that the board has been closely tracking along and staying connected throughout the past number of months in this space. So we'll start with just a brief recap of our initial extended school closure response. Then we'll talk a little bit about the current guidance for school reopening under which we've been operating. And then finally, foreshadowing future guidance and where we're going from here and how we're moving forward to best equip our schools for a safe and effective opening of the school year. And then following these three items, Noe will go ahead and also share some more post-secondary higher ed specific context for reopening efforts. So briefly in this space, I think everyone is certainly aware that all schools closed as part of the extended closure beginning on March 13th. And our team immediately began the process of working with the field, first of all, to ensure that basic needs were being met. So one of our initial steps was to apply for and receive a federal waiver around school meals. And we're exceptionally proud of and commend all of the schools and districts that worked very hard, sacrificed and did some really creative systems to ensure that students were continuing to receive meals and eligible students receiving their meals. It was critically important, and that's in some respect where our efforts began. Then simultaneously, we reached out to and began a very intensive collaborative effort with our intermediate units. And I also want to take this moment for our board and others in attendance to commend at the highest level the response of the Pennsylvania intermediate units, all 29 intermediate units, their executive directors and their teams. Within a couple weeks of the school closures, our intermediate units worked with the department and created an internal, I think it was like an 85-page guide for how to provide continuity of education in light of the extended school closures. And within that guide, providing support and technical assistance, excuse me, to over 500 of our districts and charter schools and other spaces. Almost all of our LEAs received some direct support over the spring through our intermediate units. Additionally, knowing that we had a number of students that were likely, whose districts didn't have access to digital learning platforms, we at the department were able to provide free of charge for any student in the Commonwealth and any school in the Commonwealth access to online learning platforms with coursework at the secondary level in all of the major courses, even including AP courses and career and technical education courses, and at the elementary level in their core subjects. We had over 300,000 students in the Commonwealth that accessed that free resource, and we were pleased to be able to help stand in the gap in that space. And then lastly, at least for highlighting here, our patent, we have 3 patents. That's our Pennsylvania Technical Training and Support Networks that the department, that are an extension of the department. We have one in the Philadelphia region, we have one in Harrisburg, and we have one in Pittsburgh. And they provided extensive online resources and trained over 4,000 teachers, particularly in the space of how to continue to provide support and learning in a remote environment for students who are eligible for special education services. On their website, on our Pat and Harrisburg website, there are links to dozens and dozens of videos that are actually also targeted towards families and students directly. And they had tens of thousands of hits on those resources. So we spent a considerable amount of time trying to provide supports and resources throughout the spring. That simultaneously, while supporting schools through the extended closure, we also focused our energies on the need for reopening guidance for our schools. And about 5 weeks ago, we released reopening guidance to allow schools and their boards and their communities to plan for the manner in which they're going to be able to open school in the fall. Under this guidance, each LEA is required to create a health and safety plan, and each plan must be approved by the local governing body and posted on their LEA's website, as well as submitted to the department. Those health and safety plans must address requirements identified by PDE and the department, and informed by the Department of Health and the CDC recommendations. It's important to note, while everyone is understandably seeking long-range certainty and predictability in this space, the data around and research around COVID-19 continue to evolve day by day. So, I want to say publicly that the department is committed to continuing to track those changes, work with our partners, and provide updates as the pandemic evolves and as the data and research in that space evolves. So each plan at the LEA level is required to address certain elements. And these are not all of those, but these are some of the highlights of what's required in each plan. So identifying a pandemic lead and a team that's going to lead efforts at the district, steps for protecting higher risk staff and higher risk students, guidelines for hygiene practices, guidelines for face coverings, the use of face coverings, procedures for social distancing, procedures for cleaning, sanitizing, and disinfecting spaces, and processes for symptoms monitoring, isolation, and quarantine. One of the things that the department also did to assist districts in regard to their health and safety plans is we had a small team also work on creating a template. It's a voluntary template, it's a voluntary resource that districts could use in helping them to operationalize their plans. I didn't include the entire template for this presentation. Obviously, it's roughly a 20-page document. It is available on our website for anyone that would like to see. But this is the table of contents. And one of the things I wanted to highlight as we created the template to assist districts in their planning, we were also cognizant of ensuring that districts were considering their professional development plans. How are they going to train their staff in operationalizing and implementing these plans? And also we created a template that districts could use for their communications. It remains absolutely critical for districts to continue to engage their communities and communicate in real time what their intentions are, what their plans are, and how those plans continue to evolve. And I do also want to say that as districts are working on their plans, where the greatest challenges they have is ensuring that their plans contemplate both current conditions as well as potentially future conditions. And so our districts are looking at ways that their plans are going to change if their community spread increases or if their community spread would decrease, so that they essentially have multiple plans that are ready based on changing conditions. And again, it's no small feat, and we will do all we can to continue to assist districts in that regard. In addition to the preliminary guidance that the department shared several weeks ago, as well as the template, as I mentioned before, having research, science, and data guide policy making is of paramount importance. And so along those lines, the PDE reached out to Rel Mathematica, who is one of the premier research policy entities in the country. And we asked them to essentially work with us and support us in providing information that's going to help inform our efforts and the efforts at a local level. And so what our ask involved first was for Rel Mathematica to gather emerging evidence from around the world on health risks of the disease, impacts of mitigation practices in schools, and also the impacts of various learning modalities. So the first section of the report is essentially an evidence review of existing research and links to that research to get a sense of what's happening in those areas that I just named. Second, Rel Mathematica on our behalf conducted formalized stakeholder interviews with a diverse set of stakeholders representing various entities with the goal of providing the department with a more formalized understanding of the perceptions and needs of our stakeholders. And so that's the second part of the report. And then finally, the last part of the report is around predictive modeling. And Pennsylvania is the first state in the country to work with a research partner in conducting predictive modeling, which would anticipate the difference in transmission rates of COVID based on various approaches to reopening. And so I'm going to share, to that last point, share just a couple of highlights specifically around that predictive modeling, because we know that as our districts are contemplating the extent to which they're going to provide in-person instruction in the fall, we want to arm them and their school boards and parents and communities with as much as we can around what they can expect those models to do as it relates to transmission rates and the spread of COVID in a community. Because as we all would agree, our goal is to ensure that to the maximum extent possible, schools are not contributing to any level of community spread. So on the screen, what you'll see that Mathematica had done was examined 6 different scenarios, one being a control scenario around some of the most common ways that districts may be anticipating either starting the year or in many cases, maybe considering moving to at some point in the year based on community transmission rates. These are not an exhaustive list of scenarios. These are just some of the more common that Mathematica was able to do some very sophisticated predictive modeling using Pennsylvania data sets and controlling for as many variables as possible. So very quickly, just to give a sense that this report is online for anyone to view, but to give a sense of how they did that, they ran scenario A as a baseline scenario with it, which would be a school that operates as if there had been no pandemic. So really no controls or mitigation strategies. And then various strategies, everything from having students in school 5 days a week with precautions like mask restrictions or restrictions, with mask usage or restrictions on interclass mixing, then to the impact, let's say, of daily attendance with block scheduling and precautions such as face masks and social distancing. And you'll see that each of the scenarios becomes a little more rigorous. When you get to scenario E, they started to model what scenarios would look like that don't have all students in school 5 days a week. So scenarios B, C, and D assume that all students are in school each day with some level of precautions. And then scenarios E, F, and G are various scenarios in which not all students would be in the school at one time. And I'm highlighting only the high school finding. There are also findings for the elementary level. The high school is probably a little bit more telling, and also knowing that high schools are statistically more likely to have a spread given numbers of students and the mobility of students. And so without going too deep for the purposes of today's board meeting, just to highlight some of the findings of that modeling, what was found was that each of the responses had some level of impact on transmissibility. And by the way, transmissibility is measured by the amount of time that it takes a school to reach 5 confirmed cases of infection. So for example, in scenario B, a school would be, it would take 1.2 times as long for a school to reach 5 infections as compared to a baseline of no interventions. The biggest jump happened, if you look between D and E, is where under scenario D, and I'll go back for a minute. So D is a school, would be a sample high school in which students were in school each day, all students, using precautions such as face masks and social distancing, but having students stay in one classroom and have their teachers rotate. So basically exceptionally limiting students' movements outside of their classrooms. And when comparing that to moving to a schedule in which students would be in school 2 days a week and then rotate, another group of students comes in, you'll see that you move from a time standpoint to get to 5 infections, goes from 1.7 times as long to 6.1 times as long when you start to limit the number of students in a building. So we share that information, quite frankly, not just with our administrators in schools, but also I'm sure others will look at this modeling because we are the first state to conduct that. And hopefully our hope is that even for schools that are returning with full in-person instruction in this fall, which there will be some or many that do, that in an event where community need necessitates that districts have an understanding of the potential impact as they're planning right now and determining what those schedules are going to look like. And for some districts, some of the more intensive strategies may be necessary and appropriate earlier on. So we want to, we've provided the information that will allow districts to make informed decisions. So our key takeaways from the report, one we didn't talk about extensively here, but it is in the report, is around transportation. That's an area where we'll continue to advocate for our schools. Transportation, we would advocate for collaboration between our traditional public schools, our charter schools, our non-public schools, in working together to find thoughtful measures that will allow transportation to run safely and effectively. But second, based on the evidence and research that's out there, we've taken a strong position that districts really should be providing at least some in-person instruction heading into next school year. The data is very clear that students benefit tremendously from in-person instruction. And while we recognize that there are very significant challenges in some schools to providing in-person instruction, we have to be intellectually honest in the fact that that students will benefit from in-person instruction, and we strongly encourage districts to do everything they can to find ways to build in-person instruction into their models. And then lastly, encouraging communities to focus on highest leverage strategies with their resources. So as an example, the research and evidence right now seems to point to the fact that screening, particularly screening of all individuals as they enter a school, may not be the highest leverage strategy, and a district may be better suited by leveraging their resources towards symptoms monitoring and a strategy that seems to have a stronger rate of efficacy. So that is just a very brief highlight of some of our findings and recommendations around that report. And then to close out the K-12 side, in front of you, you have our Creating Equitable School Systems Roadmap that we just released this week. And this roadmap we are going to be using as a repository of all of the additional guidance and resources that we are committed to continuing to provide in the days and weeks ahead. And we're trying to make this a space where our K-12 educators can easily access the type of information that's going to help them as they move forward. So you'll see that we have links not only to our health and safety plan template, but we just also released a school reopening instructional planning template to help districts map out their instructional plans. We're going to continue to put out various scenario planning guides for schools. And we've talked a lot earlier, many of us in the prior meeting, we're talking about social emotional wellness supports. We have a team right now that's working on providing information in tandem with some of the work that CASEL's doing at a national level, so that as we resume school, we can attend to some of the social emotional needs of our students and also, quite frankly, our staff as well. And also in that student wellness space, continue to focus on trauma-informed practices and adverse childhood experiences, and those will also be a part of those resources. Focusing on effective instruction, we want to, you'll notice there's an assessment tab there. We know it's going to be critically important for schools to assess learning gaps early on and identify where gaps need to be closed. We will be doing everything we can to provide supports and resources in that space, as well as communications resources, and then other direct learning opportunities through the department, webinars, and other trainings. So this is our roadmap forward for not only for the remainder of this summer, but also for the school year ahead. This is going to be a marathon, not a sprint. And we're going to do everything we can to stand by our school districts throughout this journey, listen to them, listen to our parents, communities, and others, and responsibly provide as much as we can in this dynamic and evolving situation. So with that, Noe, I can do slides for you here if that suits.
Sure, Matt, and I appreciate that. Happy to transition to the post-secondary and adult education program plan that was released to the public around the same time, or exactly the same time as the K through 12 plan as well. And one thing that I just want to point out briefly that I think is important to sort of highlight, and Deputy Stem referred to them at the beginning. You know, these plans were certainly developed with stakeholder feedback and input, but also with a couple of other guiding principles in mind. And it's certainly that this was certainly looking at the health and safety of students, faculty, and staff for a number of post-secondary institutions and education systems. Also, this means protecting the safety of the communities they serve. In the post-secondary space, as we were developing these, similarly to what Matt had laid out, this is about institutions and institutional-led response teams developing their own public health and safety plan that accounts for their unique context. One thing that we wanted to avoid was a one-size-fits-all approach to the type of phased-in reopening strategies that were developed or the kind of guidance that we put out. So these items were certainly kept in mind. And I think it's important that the plan also acknowledge, as it did when we put it out, that there's an interconnectedness that happens with classroom face-to-face instruction and the number of services that need to be provided to ensure that students receive a meaningful educational experience, right? And when I think about the post-secondary sector, this involves items such as Res Life. This involves student support services. This involves both co-curricular and extracurricular activities, which all come together to make up what is the academic experience of individuals. And so I say that because what we put out there's an understanding that decisions made about how you resume in-person instruction at your post-secondary institutions certainly will influence other services that institutions will be expected to provide. Quick highlight, because I don't want to take up too much time, just give you a big high-level overview. The plan was integrated into the red, yellow, green phases that already guide the state's phased-in reopening strategies. What it did that was different from when these items were first released, many of us have probably forgotten given the amount of attention that we've given to moving into developing public health and safety plans, but it wasn't until the green phase when face-to-face or in-person instruction would have resumed. And so what the plan did is that push that back into the yellow phase. So by and large, the majority of the Commonwealth has already begun to move into, this is in the post-secondary space, began to move into resuming some in-person face-to-face instruction opportunities. It's also worth pointing out that at the post-secondary level, post-secondary institutions were never closed. They simply had to pivot their modality and course offerings to remote, distance, and virtual platforms. However, there were a number of critical essential functions that remain at post-secondary institutions. For many of them, this included making sure that individuals who weren't able to leave campus because of circumstances that either put them in precarious positions or the fact that they're here from, let's say, another country, they still remained on campus, and we had to make sure that the life essential services tied to ensuring their safety was also provided to these students. And so there were critical staffing structures that were put in place. But in terms of what changes over each of the phases is that institutions began in the yellow phase to resume in-person instruction on a limited basis. Limited is defined by the institution based on their facilities, their ability to meet certain guidelines that are prescribed by CDC and the Department of Health. Some examples of this are the provision of face coverings and other materials that are necessary to ensure their safety. And then, of course, there are limitations on social gatherings and restrictions. What we did in the post-secondary plans is we made a distinction between what's considered curricular, which is the items offered in the classroom, and those that are considered non-curricular, which would be your social gathering and activities that are that involve more fan participation. And we made sure that the gathering restrictions that currently exist in Pennsylvania were applied to those specific gatherings, right? So what that means is that post-secondary institutions were able to reconfigure the classrooms to decide what the accommodation of students would be in that particular classroom, right? And so that can be accomplished to a number of ways. In some places, there would be barriers that could be established, but in others, there would be social distancing combined with face covering that would be applied. So in the post-secondary plan, these are sort of the primary elements. And then this continues into the green phase as well. You begin to resume more normal operations as you move across the various stages of the phased-in reopening plan. As always, we continue and encourage all post-secondary institutions to monitor both the CDC website, the Department of Health website, and any updates that may be given out by the Department of Education around this. And of course, to monitor their own public health indicators and adjust plans as necessary. For many institutions, they're going to be put in positions to make decisions at the local level of what precautions they may need to take in case there is some sort of local level transmission of COVID-19 at their respective institutions. Matt, if you could skip to the next slide, please, where we began to introduce at least a tool for institutions to begin to make some determinations around their preparedness to move towards the offering of in-person instruction. For many of them, this needs to includes a quick sort of analysis of their capability to do certain things that allow them to mitigate and manage risk for students, faculty, and staff when they return. This is divided into two steps. One of them is your institution prepared, and if so, then it's ask you certain questions about how you would need to prepare to resume in-person instruction. Based on decisions that institutions make with their own response teams at the local level with these two tools, they then would decide to pursue what kind of offerings they want to provide to students in terms of face-to-face instruction. So you can see that this certainly is something that is determined and defined by the institution. We also note to each institutional partner, and I've been meeting with each of the sectors on almost a weekly basis to discuss a number of scenarios. Many of them have to also prepare contingencies to their plans. Contingencies to deal with any resurgence that might happen, whether it's a state level determination of a concern around the resurgence, or in many cases, as we've seen with sort of the moving into the various stages of the Pennsylvania plan with regards to red, yellow, and green. Sometimes these are county level resurgence concerns that may emerge. And so most institutions are preparing themselves to do that. I do want to emphasize that it's critical to understand that we want to make sure that the plans also allow for institutions to think about what their containment and quarantine strategies would look like at the local level in case they have to deal with some of these concerns. And that's important because we want to avoid having to repeat the same process again that we saw resume in March. While institutions responded to the state mandates commendably, it's also important to note that these disruptions were clearly concerns that in many ways, many are still trying to sort of make, maneuver their way through. And of course, there were disruptions in terms of the provision of education to students. In some cases, we had to work closely with the General Assembly to make sure that we can offset some of the losses that occurred as folks move towards trying to complete their post-secondary education, close out their program, and move into the workforce. And for many of them, they were moving to the workforce in critical areas, such as some of the life-sustaining services tied to emergency medical technicians, police officers, et cetera, but also some of our service-oriented areas that include sort of helpers in schools like educators, teachers, counselors, and school leaders. So by and large, this is the higher ed plan in a nutshell. Matt, if you could skip to the next slide. Essentially what we did in the post-secondary plan is organize a series of CDC recommended interventions to the schools so they can choose from. So they would go in there and select the ones that best apply to their particular scenario. And this gives you a sense of how they were organized. You know, many of these are around hygiene, sanitation, face coverings. Others, because post-secondary institutions, many in Pennsylvania, are residential areas, there needs to be accommodations that need to be made for students, faculty, staff, both in attendance policy, work policies, and in the case of residential institutions, living policies as well. There are expectations that exist in order to make sure everyone's safe around voluntary reporting and monitoring of yourself when you're attending classes. People are coming in and out of post-secondary institutions all the time. Many of them are commuting to and from. So the likelihood of transmission is extremely high when you factor in those aspects. And then of course, social distancing and other physical distancing that create safer environments. And then there's always just general considerations that folks need to make around what your calendaring may look like, whether course offerings need to change. We did our best to make sure that institutions were equipped to begin to resume in-person instruction as early, for some of them, as summer 2. So many have begun to move in that direction with piloted programs, but then of course to position them to also decide whether they want to resume in-person instruction in the fall semesters as well. One thing that post-secondary institutions aren't required to do, they aren't required to submit any plans for approval to the Commonwealth or the Department of Education. They simply need to work with their teams to develop those plans and make them publicly available to their students, faculty, staff, and communities. The idea here is that the accountability that they have is to protect the communities they serve, which many of them already believe in, and then to make that tool available so students and families who are making decisions about what they're going to do in the fall can see and feel assured that there's safety practices in place at that particular institution. So that's the post-secondary plan in a nutshell. Madam Chair, I'll turn this back to you, unless Matt, you want to make any concluding comments.
No, I think we would turn it back to our chair. Thank you.
Okay, are there any questions or comments for either the secretaries?
Yes, I have a few.
I do as well when Dr. Perry's finished.
Go ahead, Jonathan.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. In 1959, Volvo designed the seatbelt. It wasn't until 1968 that it became mandatory. And we saw that there was a lot of resistance in those years to actually wearing them. Where I'm going with this is to say what the deputy secretaries have designed here are the seatbelts for the fall and following. And we've got more than 100 people on this webinar, including the members of the Board of Ed. And I just feel very compelled to say it is all of our duties to share the information that was just shared with us with as many of the institutions that we reasonably can share it with. This is very important information, and you should know that the REL work, the research work that Matt was talking about, that work, I've read, I think it's about 60 pages and maybe 25 or 30 of it is actually substantive and then the rest is appendices. I read it from beginning to end. And as Matt noted, we are the only state that has achieved this level of data research. I personally think that it should practically be compulsory, that this information be read by every district superintendent and principal in the state, and certainly by every college leader, because the scenario A through G that Matt shared is helpful not only to primary and secondary, but post-secondary. Those scenarios are scenarios that need to be considered in the planning of every single district and post-secondary institution in our Commonwealth. It is critical reading. I have, in the last several weeks, since it was in June that information was released by Secretary Rivera through the Deputy Secretary's works, I have fielded questions daily that have been based upon speculation and conjecture and fear, some of the fear substantiated and some unsubstantiated. And so many of those questions are answered by the REL document. And so I have referred person after person to it. I have referred to my colleagues the work of both Dr. Ortega and Dr. Stem that they just presented to you in their reports. And this is what I was mentioning in the beginning. This is why these folks who are at the head of the Department of Education and those who are supporting them and working with them need to be commended, because we are at the ahead of the curve here. And it's a very challenging time for our state and our nation. And this is the kind of thing where we have to thank God that this research was done in our Commonwealth, because it really is the seatbelt that's going to help us. God forbid that there's accidents on our campuses and in our schools where COVID winds up resurging. But if and where it happens, the factors that they have just presented are the things that are going to help to mitigate the severity. And we need to think about that, and we need to proliferate that message. So thank you both very much, and thank you to the Secretary, and thank you to the department again.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments?
Yes, if I might. This is Pamela Gundry-Smith, York College of Pennsylvania. I want to thank the Deputy Secretaries for their fine work. Of course, those of us who are preparing for the return of our students in the fall are knee deep in all of this and our planning. And I want to thank you for your guidance that is really guidance, measured, really reflects I would say, the array of things that we have to do at our institutions, recognizes the complexity, if you will, and the differences between K-12 education, secondary education, and adult education that we have to be aware of. And I especially want to thank you for the endless hours, especially Deputy Secretary Ortega. He has spent with higher education leaders, secondary education leaders, on the telephone with us for weekly calls to answer our questions every week. I can't tell you how much my colleagues and I appreciate your working with us such that we can do what's right for our students, and very fortunate to be part of this. So I just wanted to thank you for your efforts. My colleague Jonathan Perry and I have been on the phone calls with you, oftentimes the weekly phone calls, and to let you know how much appreciate your willingness to share and to listen to how we move forward. And finally, York College is one of those institutions that also has a K-12 unit associated with us. And so it's been helpful to have both of those to make sure that we're serving the students in the Commonwealth. So I wanted to say that. Thank you very much.
Any other comments, questions?
I do, Madam Chair. Again, I want to thank the Deputy Secretaries for all your work and the countless hours put in giving myself and the rest of the superintendents and the district across the Commonwealth the guidance that we need. So I thank you very much. I just have two clarifying questions that could perhaps help myself and the other districts in leadership positions. That is there any indication from the General Assembly as to whether the flexible day, the hybrid model is going to be counted towards the 180? And then the secondary question that I have is, have you assumed any deadline for information coming out of the Capitol as to when we should finalize, any indication as to when we should finalize these plans? And I know it's living and breathing, but perhaps maybe just a soft deadline that we should probably consider taking the information back to our districts.
Sure. Happy to answer both of those, Nathan. And let me just commend you and others that are down in the trenches and solving some of these problems that feel almost impossible to solve. So let me answer your first question. So for the entire board, the question really relates to if a district chooses one of those models, let's say E, F, or G that we showed in the model, and does not have all students in school every day, will that still get to count towards the required 180-day, 990-hour requirement. So Nathan, the answer is, it might not have gotten your way yet, but just the day before yesterday, we pushed something out to the field on that very issue. And yes, as long as your school board will need to approve the schedule and submit that to the department. But there is a provision in statute, and we could go offline and I'll give you the section that we referred to, but that will allow school boards to implement temporary provisions during an emergency, and we deem this to be an emergency. So they would need to get submitted to the state, and then the secretary can approve those as long as they're still meeting other Chapter 4 and Chapter 11 guidelines at a high level. So the answer is there is a pathway there for you, and we can get that your way, maybe through Karen. We'll get you a copy of that memo. And then to the second question around the submission of plans, those are the only condition is to submit those before returning to in-person instruction. So we're trying to give districts as much time to adapt to any changing information without having to submit it, and then new information comes out. And so as long as they're submitted before in-person instruction, that's the timeline.
I thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
This is Maureen Lally-Green, and excellent presentations and well-written reports, just really very thoughtful. I have two questions. One that deals with the teacher part. You've been using the term staff and faculty, but in my experience, I still teach part-time, but of course I'm pretty linked to the academic world in my life. And there's a lot of concern, and then maybe even some pushback by faculty in returning to the classroom. And I wonder how that has been addressed. I know it's somewhat addressed in the mathematical studies of whether a teacher rotates or the students rotate, but more just from the bigger picture of the actual faculty primarily resisting returning when things are not, pretty settled. That's question number one. And I think that threads both elementary, high, and secondary, but also the post-secondary collegiate worlds. And the second question deals with some of the special ed services. I know you did as great a job as you could, but what became some of the hiccups that required federal intervention? And I noticed that occasionally federal statements from the Department of Education came out saying you can do this, you can't do that. And there just seemed to be a lot of confusion there, particularly in the area of special ed that required one-on-one interactions under the law or signatures that just got recently resolved. So I know two very different questions, faculty first and then some of the special ed questions.
Sure. I'm happy to respond. Forgive me in advance for the brevity of the responses, because both of those warrants probably a longer response than I'm going to give to either one.
Okay.
But I will give you the sort of the concise responses. So in the first one, in regards to teachers and there being resistance to returning to schools, I think one of the things that we've continued to hear from teachers through our, and we connect with teachers in a variety of different ways, but consistently we're hearing that the overwhelming majority of teachers want to get back to in-person instruction, which is great and not surprising. Our teachers are very committed, but they do want to do so under safe conditions. And so I think what we hear more than anything else is teachers asking for the assurances that their health and safety plans are addressing those concerns. And I think there's been great collaboration. We've already received a number of plans from districts, and there's been great collaboration among educators and districts. And I think a lot of that is because districts are being attentive to higher risk staff. And so we've encouraged flexibility with regards to how districts, particularly for higher risk staff, are allowing accommodations to ensure that teachers stay safe. But the good news is that many districts are already figuring this out. And to teachers' credit, the message we're hearing is that they want to return to in-person instruction as long as they're being assured of accommodation.
I am on mute. Okay, that's good.
I think there we go. I think somebody might need to mute. Then the second question in regards to special education, that's a challenge for every school in every state here in the country, and by the way, internationally. Our Bureau of Special Education, Carol Clancy and her team, has even been monitoring, and the same challenges we have are happening throughout the world with regards to how do you provide the types of services for students with special needs that they're not only morally entitled to, but legally entitled to through their individual education plans. And so the guiding principle has been reasonable and appropriate. And we've strongly encouraged a lot of collaboration and communication between families and teachers. And even in those best scenarios, we are finding cases where there's going to have to be gaps that need to be made up in person at some point. There's certain services that just can't be provided virtually, but where it's working is where trust has been built and where relationships have been built between families and schools. And yes, the feds are watching. They really haven't changed too many of the federal laws and directives in order to protect students. So our Bureau of Special Ed, this is what they've certainly been doing days, nights, and weekends for the past 4 months, is working with the field to help them through this. It's a great challenge. There's no doubt.
I have to thank you, just the whole department, State Department of Education. Your communications have been great. And these are just some of the things I've seen in the literature, a lot more than what I would say I've seen in PA. But across the United States, some major issues on both those counts. And maybe it's more in the higher education realm that I see the teacher resistance than I do in the elementary and secondary arena, maybe because the faculty is often older, and I don't know if that's true or not. I'm just kind of making it up right now, but a lot of the more senior faculty really have that concern. So I'll just leave it like that, but it's certainly, I applaud all of you are doing.
And I think it's important to mention, when we think about the faculty, because this question comes up quite a bit. We've done our best to provide the roadmap that would help institutions put the conditions in place for safety for students, faculty, and staff. In many ways, we also elected to have it to be institutional-led, because I think at that local level, the institutional-led response teams work collectively to develop an area where they feel collectively safe. But when I think about faculty, especially since academics is such a core principle of post-secondary institutions, it's a tenet, really, that they have a lot of agency in being able to do something which I think is really important. They develop scaffolding, they put in place pedagogy, they teach students how to be other-oriented, right? And it never has the time been more important for folks to think about what is being learned in the classroom applies to real-life scenarios. There's a huge responsibility that everyone has to own when you step back into a campus and make that place safe for everybody. And I think this is where I think I want to encourage a number of faculty to sort of step into that role, because they're going to be pivotal to offsetting some of the work that their institutional leaders have put in place. They're covenants that faculty and students need to enter with that institution, where they make commitments to ensure that everyone is safe. We accept outcomes from higher ed all the time on faith. When teachers come into our classrooms, we assume that they were given all the preparation that they need. We do that with leaders. And I think here's one of those areas where the real test is whether that safety, assurance, and other oriented approaches in the classroom really work. And I think that's a really important thing to really say there about the role that faculty are going to play in offsetting the plans that are being put in place by institutional leaders. I'll stop there. I just wanted to make sure that was...
Okay, you know what, we have time, we do have some time constraints, so we have time for one more question or comment. Is there anyone else? Okay, Secretary Stem and Ortega, thank you for your reports. I know the reports reflect a lot of work and atmosphere and environment that's ever changing, so thank you to you and your staff. Okay, can we take a short break and reconvene at 3:15? Hello?
Karen, I think most members are muted, but if you would like to take a break, you can call for that and we'll reconvene at 3:15.
Okay. Well, then we'll reconvene at 3:15. Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, it's 3:15, so I'd like to reconvene the meeting. Can you all hear me? Can everybody hear me?
I can hear you,
Okay.
Karen.
Okay, all right. Next, we'll turn to our discussion item, the findings of fact and conclusions of law on the Erie County Community College Plan. This document was prepared to reflect the deliberations of our June 10th and 11th hearing that resulted in the adoption of an interlocutory order to approve the plan. I'd like to ask our counsel, Tom Howe, to briefly review the document, and then I will provide an opportunity for members to offer any comments they would like to make at this time. I intend to call up this document for consideration as the board's final order in this matter later in the agenda. Mr. Howe?
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Available?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay,
yes,
thank
I can
you.
hear you.
Well, thank you. After the conclusion of the hearing regarding the Erie Community College Plan, and in accordance with this board's instructions, I reviewed the transcript that included both the evidence put forward by the parties as well as the public discussion and questions asked by this board. And in order to satisfy the administrative agency law and the general rules of administrative practice and procedure, drafted findings and conclusions of law for this board's review and, if acceptable, adoption. These findings are specifically drafted based upon what I understood to be the rationale of the majority of the board that voted to approve the plan, as best I could garner from the questions that were asked and the public discussion. And they are fully founded upon the record that was developed during the hearing held in June. The beginning of the document is essentially a procedural history that provides background on how the plan came to the board's attention, the full board's initial consideration and action, and the various committees that had been established both to initially review the plan and to establish the procedural rules for the hearing. Following that is a recitation of the members of the board who participated in the Erie hearing directly. The exhibits offered by all of the parties, and findings of fact that are drawn directly from the testimony and documentary evidence that was provided by the parties. Subsequent to the findings, of course, are legal conclusions that, in essence, interpret and apply the law in light of those findings. The conclusions and findings indicate that the board's opinion is that the Erie plan met the requirements of the school code with respect to establishing a community college, and that it is the board's order to approve that plan effective as of the date of this board's final action adopting the findings, conclusion, and order.
Okay. Okay, does that conclude your report then, Mr. Howe?
It does. I'm certainly willing to entertain questions from anyone with respect to what's contained in the findings and conclusions.
Does anybody have any questions or comments? Okay, is there a motion to approve this document?
I have a question. This is Representative Sonny.
Thank you, Representative.
I believe this is the document that I read yesterday. And one of the conclusions that was in the document was that it was established that NPRC was not a community college. And I was wondering, you know, how was that really established that it was not? I know that during the process that a question was asked of it being a community college, and I believe your response for the most part was, you know, well, it has its own line item and its own section in the code. And so, you know, based on that fact alone, I guess, the assumption was made that NPRC was not a community college. You know, that's my question. I believe that NPRC is a community college. It services multiple communities, but it operates and acts and exists almost identical to the community college. And so that was my question. How was that determined in this official document that NPRC is not a community college?
Well, as we discussed during those original conversations that I think was an executive session, so I do have to caution about waiving attorney-client privilege by discussing legal advice that was provided during executive session. But my understanding is that it was the board's determination that NPRC was not a community college. If that understanding is incorrect, we can certainly amend the opinion, the findings and conclusion. However, I will say that finding and conclusion are based upon the testimony, including that which was provided by, I believe, Mr. Mahan, who indicated, I think both during direct and cross-examination, that NPRC was a different area, I think area is the term he used to refer to it, than a community college, and did not have a local sponsor and doesn't receive required local funding as a community college would do. Again, though, this is based upon my understanding of the board majority, and if the majority of the board does not believe that that is an appropriate conclusion, that can certainly be re-examined.
It doesn't fall under community college law. It's statutorily different.
That's correct.
Okay. I mean,
it's a separate article of the code. It's not, a community college would be approved by the board if you're using that phrase in the legislative terminology that is used. This NPRC is simply not something that's approved by the board. It's a different process.
All right. You know, I don't know if we should vote on that question or not. I mean,
my question is, how do we vote on something that's statutory? You're going to have to explain that to me.
The issue, it's not, you know, in being some kind of decider of fact and decider of law, I don't think we can go against what the legislature have instituted as law and what the governor has signed into law. So I think we do know the people who can do that, though.
Well, yes. And you also don't know legislative intent when those laws are written. And of course, you know, arguably, if intent is not followed, that's up to the legislature to clarify. So, you know, I'm not trying to rock the boat. Really not. I just wanted clarification on, you know, how that determination was put in these, you know, final article here.
I would suggest that a contrary result would most appropriately look something like, though not statutorily established as a community college, NPRC functions like a community college. However, it was not my understanding that the majority of the board had reached that conclusion.
Okay. That ends my question.
Okay, thank you.
Karen. Chair, Madam Chair. Madam Chair. Hello? Madam Chair?
Yes.
Do we need to call for the question, or should we have comment prior to the call for the question? I'm ready to make a call for the question if it's the timing.
No, not yet.
Okay.
Not yet.
Okay.
Not yet.
Should we?
Madam Chair?
Yes.
This is Senator Dinniman. I just wanted to say that I did review all the documents. Both myself and I believe Representative Roebuck had obligations in the Senate. Well, Representative Roebuck would have been in the House. I had my obligations in the Senate. We were in session, in fact, 1 or 2 days of hearing. So I will be voting, but I wanted to make it clear that I have read the document, which goes on for page after page. In fact, it's almost a foot high here in front of me. So because I think in order to vote on this, I have to show I've done a deliberative process, and I want to just put on the record that I've done that by reading and going through the material. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. Thank you. Any other comments?
Is this the comment phase prior to the resolution?
Is this, I'm sorry?
Jim, this is the opportunity for discussion among members of the board before we move to public comment.
Okay. So the board should wait to comment?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
No, this is
No.
the opportunity for board
This is the
members
time.
to have discussion, and then we'll move to public comment.
Okay, I would just like to comment on the resolution for Erie's Community College. Is this the appropriate time?
Yes.
Yes, thank you. You know, as an Erieite, Erie has had a long history of wanting a community college. After a decade of discussion, dialogue about the need for a community college, County Council passed a resolution on June 12th, 2017 to apply. 3 years and thousands of hours and efforts later, a unified community brought their plan to the board with its justification per state law. A community college is a missing piece in the educational puzzle to improve Erie County. The application had a thorough, exhausting examination after one of the most extensive hearings, 2 days on the subject. We all received the legal findings of fact, and most importantly are the 7 points of conclusion of law per our solicitor. It was concluded Erie deserves a community college. Beyond all the facts, the spirit of Erie's future and hope rests with us. MLK, Martin Luther King, said everything that is done in the world is done by hope. As an Erieite, I hope this board will overwhelmingly support this historic effort that unified a very diverse community. Overwhelmingly, its citizens, business, chamber, and concerned citizens about the future of this region. This has the broadest base of support of anything I've ever witnessed in Erie County. Let's give Erie County hope and send a strong message of validation to the citizens of Erie by voting yes on their effort to improve the future for all citizens in Erie County. Now is the time. Erie County is the place. Thank you for your thoughtful and heartfelt consideration, and please vote to improve educational opportunity for all. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Are there any other comments?
Yeah, Karen, it's Nicole. I'd like to make a final comment.
Okay.
I feel the board made this decision based on emotion and not facts. The fact is there isn't population. The fact is there isn't state money. And the fact is there's plenty of schools, barring semantics or statutorial legalities, that already provide the exact same coursework that the community college is going to. I feel Erie Council wants control of a ton of state and local money coming their way that's not going to benefit the people of Erie. They have other issues that need addressed prior to a community college. And I feel we're wasting their community's money and state tax money on something that is already available to them in that area. So I just wanted to reiterate that I feel the decision was based on emotion and not fact. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
May I be recognized, Madam Chair?
Yes.
I'd like to counter Dr. Barker and say that I'm going to support it, but not because of emotional reasons, because Erie deserves it, but because their application met all 3 criteria that the board was asked to use to make our decision. And I believe that the application provided evidence and data to support the application without needing to say they deserved it or they don't deserve it. They made their case and they did the legal thing they needed to do. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Anyone else?
This is Representative Roebuck. Am I muted or am I in?
No, we can hear you. We can hear you.
Okay, I just wanted to pretty much echo what Senator Dinniman said in terms of the my review of the materials on this issue, and also trying to fit it into a somewhat crazy legislative schedule. But I want to let you know that I did review the material, and my vote which I do in fact favor the college, is based upon that review, and I look forward to Erie having a community college that it seems that a large number of people in that area definitely want. So that's where I am, and I just want to put that on the record.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else?
Karen, Jim,
Yes.
Jim
Yes.
Agnes,
Yes.
are you recognizing? Go ahead.
Yes, I hear. Yes.
All right.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to reiterate what I said once before. My only concern about the approval of a community college in Erie is finances. I don't think that the eventuality of the casino there being able to continue to fund millions and millions of dollars is realistic. I've operated education there for 30 some years. The population is not what it used to be, to the point where I had to change our recruiting because Erie, as you know, you cannot recruit from 360 degrees. You only have 180 degrees. North of you, you have a lake and you got Canada. So you got to reach out to different states, different counties. So my concern is economics. I don't know that it can sustain it. And that's my biggest fear. That's it.
Thank you. Any other comments?
Yes, Representative Sonny for a comment.
Yes. Go ahead.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to say that, obviously I've lived in Erie County, most of my life. But I want nothing but the best for Erie County. And I want that, absolutely to be on the record, because that is really and truly what is in my heart. But I also believe that NPRC is a community college, and that Erie County would be much better off by partnering with NPRC and directing their resources directly to those students that they have, so purposely and adamantly spoken for, that need, more remedial help and need more assistance to be successful in higher education. Unfortunately, I am going to be voting against their application because I believe that it's in their best interest to partner. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Yes, Madam Chair. I just wanted to thank Dr. Williams for bringing to light the 3 points that we as a board are primarily focusing on in deciding this, whether Erie County has the population to support a community college, and that has been documented over a number of reports that have been done that it does, whether they have a financial plan that is adequate and sufficient to show that for the next 5 to 10 years that they definitely have the resources to support community college, and that has been outlined and been accepted by the department as being adequate, and whether there's an unmet need. And that in particular is one that I think it's important to highlight. Whatever the good intentions of these other educational institutions, it seems that for, again, whatever reason, the needs of Erie County residents, and most particularly the city of Erie, have not been met adequately by those institutions. And that a community college, given its focus and given its particular emphasis on meeting the needs of students that need that bridge oftentimes from K to 12 to a 4-year institution, that Erie County is in need of it. They've shown that they have a broad base of support and diverse base of support, and particularly from the employers who have spoken to what need is not being met, that this is a institution that would fit that need. So it is aligned very well with the mission that this department and this board have outlined in terms of the direction of higher education in the Commonwealth. And so I am enthusiastically supporting the proposal, looking forward to them having an opportunity to hit the ground and implement what has been in the works and very, very diligently supported for some number of years. Thank you.
Hello?
You're unmuted again, Karen.
Oh, okay. I was offline, so I didn't hear the last 5 minutes or so. So is there anyone else that has comment?
Madam Chair, this is Jeff Keeling. I would just reiterate again that as an educator, I am pro-education, I am pro-opportunity and so forth, but my issue comes back to the fact that I am simply not convinced that these three criteria are indeed met when it comes down to duplication of services and the offerings that are available, as well as the financial perspective. I cannot sign my name onto something that I don't know for sure is sustainable in the coming years. The last thing I want to see is the board approve something and have it start and then have it fail. I think we're at a critical crossroads here at which we can promote collaboration among an existing institution and a community that is in need of those services and ultimately come up with something that may be better than these two operating independently. So again, I support the need for the education, but I am not convinced beyond the shadow of any doubt that some of these items and points that we are to consider are actually met. So that's where I stand on it. Again, I wish Erie, the community the best, but I can't conscientiously support it when we have a service within that region that's already being provided and we're basically creating competition. One of those institutions is going to fail as a result of this. That's just my opinion, but that's where I stand.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Yes, Karen, I adopt my prior comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, our next item on our agenda is public comment. If there are any members of the public participating via webinar that would like to address the State Board of Education, please indicate by selecting the raise your hand icon on the toolbar at the bottom of your screen. Staff will unmute you one at a time, and your comments will be limited to 3 minutes per person.
Okay, the first person that is up for public comment is Freda Tepfer.
Yes, I'm on the line. Thank you for this opportunity to, once again to speak to you as an alumnus of Nassau Community College and 3 community colleges in Washington State, as well as an instructor and a volunteer in community colleges. As everyone has said, Erie has met all of the criteria. There is adequate population, there is adequate finances, and there is clearly an unmet need. I know exactly what is needed by the students who attend community colleges. Students who have needs in preparation, who may not be ready for university. That's what happened in my case. I needed some time in a more helpful environment before I could go on and eventually graduate from Cornell University and have a successful career. Also, I am aware that only recently did the NPRC hire some success people to work the Erie area. Erie needs a real community college. And in fact, if the NPRC is a good model for rural areas, it will not fail. It will continue to supply education online to people in the rural areas. And I was in Harrisburg in October hoping for you to vote on the community college at that time, and I urge you to do so today. Thank you.
Thank you. The next person for public comment is David Dix. Introduce yourself. David?
Madam Chairman, unfortunately, I'm not David Dix. I'm Bishop Dwayne Brock. And I wish to address yourself and this distinguished board during this time, and I wish to thank you for the opportunity. On behalf of all of the residents of the city of Erie and Erie County, I wish to thank this distinguished board for your consideration. On behalf of those who have been marginalized within our community historically for years and years and years, and on behalf of those who have felt they could not make it, with no expectation and no anticipation in their life, those who have had no hope, I want to thank you. I want to thank you for your patience and listening to our plea. I wish to thank those who worked through blood, sweat, and tears to bring this moment to pass, and those all over Erie County as we speak that are sitting on the edge of their seats with the spirit of anticipation, waiting for the affirmative. So thank you. Thank you for listening. Thank you for leaning and giving us your consideration. On behalf of the young people now who can have and see glimmers of hope and opportunity for their future. And lastly, Madam Chairman, in the words of the prophet of ancient Jerusalem, what doth the Lord require of thee but to do justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with thy God. Thanks again, and God bless you, and God bless this entire board on behalf of the citizens of Erie County.
Thank you.
Yeah. Next person for public comment is William Wittenberg. Mr. Wittenberg, if there you go.
Okay, sorry. I'm William A. Bill Wittenberg, resident of the Commonwealth and Erie County and the borough of Wesleyville. After being born and raised in Erie and primarily Wesleyville, I returned after a 26-year Air Force career and to reside in Erie County and Wesleyville again. I'm a layman. I don't have any technical professional standing, but as far as community colleges go, my undergraduate work before going on to my master's work in public administration consisted of at least 25% attendance at community colleges in 4 different locations of the United States and overseas while serving there. I also encourage people who work for me and others to attend community college because of the quality of the instruction and the low cost, saving both the government, which supplemented military attendance at college, and my personal expenses of attending community college. The 3 prongs of the requirements have been fulfilled. Whether the Northwest Pennsylvania Regional College is a community college, last Senator Representative Sony said, is not an issue here because Erie County will serve a very diverse population, as today's previous discussions of Title 49 or Section 49 have indicated. It's going to serve a very much provide a benefit to the very people that need the education, which are the stock and trade of Erie County. Plus, it'll provide Erie County with the tool that it needs and the businesses need. Thank you very much. And I also like to commend the board on its professionalism as well as the staff of conducting the hearings last month and this month. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next on the list for public comment is Ronald DiNicola.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Madam Chairman and members of the board, I am Ron DiNicola. I am the co-founder of Empower Erie, and I would like to address the issue that has been raised that has suggested that the MPRC is a community college, and there are too many factors that distinguish the NPRC as a community college that it would take up too much time. So I'm going to just address 2 or 3 of the main features that were very important to our industrial and business community, that was important to our educators, was important to our citizens. Number 1 is that a community college, the DNA of a community college, is that it is locally administered. That is, that a community that adopts a community college is able to live out the requirements of its own economy in order to meet the needs of the local economy, the local body politic, and the urban and rural community from which we come. The MPRC does not provide that. Erie County is equal in population to all of the other counties of the MPRC combined, but it has only 2 out of 15 votes on that board. That is not something that works for our industrial community that needs to be able to move with alacrity in this economy so they can adjust to the changing needs and demands of that economy. They have to have the ability working with the community to meet the specific needs of the community. Second, our manufacturers and our leaders of industry and our leaders in the political realm have concluded that the MPRC simply does not reach the scale that is necessary of a community college in this economy. And finally, of course, the distribution model being a admittedly unusual distance learning methodology does not meet the requirements of our urban, suburban, rural population. These are things that are very characteristic of our community that need to be addressed. There are many other reasons that distinguish those 2 models, but the community college, as President Obama has said, is the unsung workhorse of the American education system. And Erie, Pennsylvania, as a dominant workhorse in the industrial sector for 200 years, deserves this community college. We appreciate your consideration. We thank you for the time and effort you had spent on this. Our only regret is that you weren't able to share a sunset with us in Erie when the vote first came up. We hope we'll have that opportunity in the future. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
The last person that had their hand raised was Sheila Woger. Sheila, you're unmuted. Ms. Woger, I have tried to unmute you. I think you have to unmute yourself. Okay.
Okay.
I apologize.
Is that it?
I'm not sure why.
Okay.
That's all
All
that
right.
are on the webinar.
Okay. So
that's all
now,
on the webinar, yeah.
Okay. Now, if there are any members of the public participating via teleconference only that would like to address the State Board of Education We will unmute the line at this time and ask for the names of each person who wishes to speak. Staff will record a list of those who want to speak and call on you individually to provide comment. Your comments will be limited to 3 minutes per person.
I just saw that up for you. It's some perfect needles and thread now.
Are there people on the conference call that wish to provide public comment?
I know he is.
Okay.
Yeah, he's familiar with it.
Okay, are we assuming there are none then?
Correct.
Okay.
Karen, I don't hear anyone speaking up that they would like to address the board.
Okay. Okay. So we'll. Who is it? I'm sorry. Yeah. Well, please. Will everyone please mute your line? We're getting a lot of feedback. Okay, we'll now turn to our action items. First, I'd like to call up the proposed amendments to Chapter 49 that were reviewed earlier in detail by both the Teacher and School Leader Effectiveness Committee and the Council on Higher Education. I'd like to recognize Ms. Dungy-Glenn for a motion on Chapter 49.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And again, I'd just like to thank you and Dr. Lee Williams for your support and participation as members of the committee. And I move that the State Board of Education approve the proposed amendments to Chapter 49 as recommended by the Teacher and School Leader Effectiveness Committee and the Council of Higher Education.
Second.
Is there a second? Someone say second?
Stephanie, that was Lee.
Thank you, Lee.
Okay, any discussion? Okay, Ms. Jones, we need a roll call vote.
Mr. Agris, yay or nay?
Agris, yay.
Honorable Achel.
Yay.
Dr. Barker.
Yay.
Mr. Barrett.
Yay.
Dr. Bracy Green. Dr. Carnasella. Dr. Carnasella. Okay. Senator Dinniman.
Stephanie, I believe Senator Dinniman needs to be unmuted.
I did unmute him.
Yeah. Yeah.
Senator Dinniman, yay or nay? Okay.
Yay.
Mr. Dungy-Glenn. Dr. Gunter Smith.
Yay.
Dr. Keeling.
Yay.
Honorable Lolly Green.
Yay.
Senator Langerholk. Okay, I'll go back. Dr. Perry.
Yay.
Representative Roebuck.
Yay.
Representative Sonny.
Yay.
Ms. Farmer White.
Yay.
Dr. Williams.
Yay.
And I will go back to Senator Langerholk. I don't actually see him. Okay, so that's 14 yes votes, 0 nays.
Okay, motion carries. Thank you for your leadership, Sandra.
Thank
okay,
you.
Next, I'd like to call up the final order on Erie County Community College Plan. I'd like to recognize Dr. Barker for a motion.
Thank you, Karen. I move that the State Board of Education adopt the proposed report of findings of fact and conclusions of law on the Erie County Community College Plan, along with a final order to approve the plan.
Second.
Okay, any discussion? Okay, Stephanie, we need a roll call vote.
Mr. Agris?
No.
Honorable Achel?
No.
Dr. Barker?
Yes.
Mr. Barrett?
Yes.
I apologize. Could you speak up, please?
Yes.
Okay. Dr. Bracy Green? Dr. Carnicella?
No.
Senator Dinniman?
Yes.
Senator Dinniman?
Yes.
I apologize. Could you repeat that? It was hard.
Am I unmuted or not?
Yes, you are unmuted.
You're unmuted.
Yeah,
I just confirm your vote. Could you please repeat your vote, Senator Dinniman?
I vote yes.
Thank you. Could you please repeat your vote, Senator Dinniman?
Yes.
Thank you. Ms. Dungy Glenn? Dr. Gunter Smith?
Yay.
Dr. Keeling?
No.
Honorable Lolly Green?
Yes.
Senator Langerholk? Dr. Perry?
Yay.
Representative Roebuck?
Yes.
Representative Sonny?
No.
Ms. Farmer White?
Yes.
Dr. Williams?
Yes or yay, whichever one counts.
Okay, thank you. I have 10 yes votes, yay votes, and 5 nay votes.
Okay, motion carries. Thank you. Finally, I'd like to call up the 2000.
Madam Chair.
I'm sorry. Yeah.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
Jim Barker. May I just say a few words?
Yes. Yes.
First, I just want to say today, July 8th, 2020, history was made in Erie County by the state boards providing renewed hope in a city and a county staff still reeling from the $1 billion of educational cuts by the state in 2010, primarily affecting minority and poor disadvantaged districts throughout the state. Today's approval is a giant and lasting leap forward for Erie and the Commonwealth. Erie and the Commonwealth must continue this effort to provide justice via a quality education opportunity for all students. The reality is that we know Erie County will get the job done. Personally, I'm proud of the board, I'm proud of Erie County, and I'm proud to say that today we took a stand, the right stand, to help not only Erie, but the Commonwealth begin the dialogue which Jonathan Perry talked about. We spent a lot of time on the fringes about curriculum, programs, etc. But the reality is, as Jonathan Perry said, we have to get to the heart of systemic discrimination and racism, which is the funding that occurs in Pennsylvania. This is a giant step forward for the city, for the county, and I believe the Commonwealth. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, finally, I'd like to call up the 2021 meeting calendar. Draft dates were circulated, feedback from us, and the calendar before us when a majority of the members are available to participate. Can I hear a motion to approve our 2021 meeting calendar?
So moved, Agris.
Is there a second?
Second.
Discussion.
Yes, I would like to filibuster, please.
What's that, Jonathan?
I'm sorry.
I said I would like to filibuster.
Oh, Perry.
Jonathan, it's a good thing we're online, because if you filibustered and we were there together, it wouldn't be pretty.
John, didn't recognize you without the beard, John.
I was bearded and now I'm
Okay.
beardless.
Okay, any other discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, I have one announcement to share before we adjourn. The U.S. Department of Education recently approved our application to continue as an approved accrediting body for post-secondary career and technical education programs in the Commonwealth. Our accrediting authority was extended for another 5 years.
Yeah.
I'd like to acknowledge Dr. Lee Burkett, Director of the Bureau of Career and Technical Education, and extend thanks to her and her staff for their hard work in preparing this application and defending the work we do before the U.S. Department of Education. Are there any other announcements for the board?
Madam Chair, I'd like to just say something very quickly, and that is, I don't know if the the legislator's schedules will allow Senator Dinniman to return to one of our meetings, but now I used to sit next to him when I was on the Council of Higher Ed, and we certainly will miss him. And I just learned he chose not to run again, and so just wishing you well in case we don't see you before your term is up.
Thank you, Barker. I echo those sentiments.
I think we all echo those sentiments.
Karen.
So thank you for your service. Yes.
Thank you.
Jim Agris. Just for the record, orchids to Dr. Lee Burkett and her staff. We don't see what they do too often, but they're a force to be recognized, and congratulate them on this 5-year reapproval. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Any other announcements? I thank you all for your hard work and all you do. Our next meeting will be September 9th and 10th. And I guess we'll have to determine whether it will be a virtual meeting or in person. So it's to be determined. So is there a motion to adjourn the meeting, this meeting of the State Board of Education?
So moved.
Second.
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 All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. We stand adjourned. Stay safe and enjoy the rest of your summer.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Karen and Stephanie.
6 feet from Barker.
Oh, yes. Special thanks. Yes. Special thanks to Stephanie and Karen for pulling
Absolutely.
this together and all their hard work. Yeah.
Oh, thank you very much.
Okay.
Over and out.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Karen and Steph in particular. Thank you.